Breaking news now. Russia's spending during the war. Alexandra Prokopenko here with the Bells weekly report on the state of the Russian economy. Russia's 2024-2026 budget analysis, which predicts record-high military spending, is today's top story. We also examine a proposal to differentiate between domestic and offshore trading in the Russian ruble, bringing it in line with the Chinese yuan. The Russian budget for 2024-2026 features unprecedented funding for the military. When discussing Russia's recent budget, Russian Finance Minister Anton Silvanov resorted to Soviet-era jargon. According to him, the phrase, "everything for the front, everything for victory," a slogan from World War II, sums up the contents of the package perfectly. Military spending accounts for the bulk of this budget. And it shows where the government's priorities lie: in funding the war in Ukraine, in allocating resources to the security apparatus, in resettling people from the occupied regions of Ukraine, and in doling out social welfare. The Russian government has prioritized military spending over social spending for the first time in the country's modern history. Where will all of this cash come from? The State Duma of Russia will vote on the finalized budget for 2024-2026 this week. The government's projected revenue collection of 35 trillion rubles in 2024 is especially eye-opening. That's 34% more than they expect to collect this year. The Ministry of Economic Development has projected a 2.3% increase in GDP, $85 per barrel oil prices, and a 90.1 ruble average exchange rate with the US dollar in 2024. The central bank's projections, on the other hand, are significantly more conservative. It expects GDP growth of up to 1.5% and oil prices of $60 per barrel. Raising that kind of money while President Vladimir Putin keeps up the war in Ukraine and the West and its allies prepare more sanctions seems impossible. However, the Kremlin is banking on several assumptions being true. A. The oil price will remain high. B. Russia will continue to sell oil to India and China. C. The Western price cap on Russian oil will not change, and will continue to be ineffective. And D. Western countries will not risk further oil embargoes. The government also does not anticipate any fresh import restrictions. Next year, revenues from sources other than oil and gas are expected to account for 13.1% of GDP. The government expects an increase in VAT revenues thanks to a rise in domestic demand as the economy expands. A windfall tax on corporations is one source of these large one-time receipts. A sizable portion of this funding comes from private companies. Russian private industry has reason to feel mistreated because its flexibility helped the Russian economy survive Western sanctions and the economic turmoil that accompanied the outbreak of war. Its tax burden has grown considerably recently. As one source of revenue for the budget, the Finance Ministry of Russia argued this week that new export duties will contribute to some improvement in the fairness of the distribution of rental income in these industries. Companies have not been informed about the new duties, which, when added to the windfall tax, can result in an effective tax rate for some in excess of 50%. Where will the money go? The projected budget for 2024 is 36,600 million rubles, an increase of 26.2% from 2023. The budget deficit will drop from the projected $2.9 trillion this year to $1.6 trillion in 2024 as a result. According to military expert and Fletcher School professor Pavel Luzin, the increased military spending is not solely for the purpose of making more hardware. The government is attempting to account for the high costs of endless import substitution, the operational inefficiency of the defense sector, and large payments to soldiers and the families of those killed in action in Ukraine by allocating nearly 11 trillion rubles to the military. There are also line items in the budget that pertain to the cost of the war and the occupation of Ukrainian territory. The war has contributed to rising social spending. For instance, Putin recently mandated the establishment of a fund called Defenders of the Fatherland to aid in the medical care and reintegration into society of combatants, contract soldiers, conscripts, mercenaries. The federal government will contribute significantly to the fund. Large sums of money will also be invested by the government in the Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. There is a specific line item in the budget for the socio-economic development of these areas, and in 2024, Russia plans to allocate 37.5 billion rubles toward repairing the damage it caused in these areas. Interbudgetary transfers, however, will channel a significantly larger amount to the territories currently under occupation. They have received 483 billion rubles in non-reciprocal transfers from the federal budget in 2023. According to Vedomosti, the occupied regions will receive the lion's share of a 178 billion ruble increase in regional budget subsidies in 2024. The mystery of inflation. The budget's low inflation projection for 2024 is one of its most puzzling aspects. Despite a planned 34% increase in spending, a weakening ruble, and an increase in tariffs, the government apparently expects only 4.5% inflation. The government forecasts 2.7% growth in real disposable income and 2.5% growth in salaries as a result of the labor shortage, a dynamic that would normally be expected to raise inflation. With so many potential causes of inflation, the current level of interest rates, 13.5%, is the only way the central bank can keep inflation below 4.5%. The authority has already forewarned the legislature of this eventuality. And then what? In 2025, the defense and military budget will no longer require as much funding, according to the Ministry of Finance. The government will once again use the old budget rules to control spending. This, however, reads more like wishful thinking than analytical reality. No one in the Ministry of Finance or the government knows when or if Western sanctions will be effective enough to reduce Russia's revenues. Furthermore, oil prices tend to be highly volatile. Inquiring minds want to know why the rest of the world should care. The Kremlin's continued reliance on military spending will further trap the economy in a state of eternal war. Financing the war without lowering living standards is becoming harder to do as time goes on. Tax increases or a renewed mobilization effort are just two examples of the sorts of surprises that can arise. With Putin expected to win the presidential election early next year, the Kremlin will have a chance to implement controversial policies. The Chinese model of a two-tiered currency for the Russian ruble? This week, Economic Development Minister Maxim Reshetnikov revived debates about regulating the international flow of money. To combat ruble volatility, the Ministry of Economic Development apparently plans to implement the Chinese method, which Reshetnikov describes as erecting a membrane between domestic and international ruble markets. At the outset of China's market reforms, a two-tier model of currency regulation developed. Its purpose was to cushion the effects of capital inflows and outflows on the domestic economy and prevent further speculation. It also makes it harder for businesses, both domestic and foreign, to take out profits made in China. What this amounts to in practice is a halving of the yuan. The People's Republic of China uses the domestic yuan, CNY, and the National Bank of China controls the exchange rate. And then there's the yuan, CNH, that's kept in offshore accounts and traded on international currency markets. This allows for the disaggregation of monetary transactions related to regular business operations, current accounts, from those involving the speculative use of surplus funds, capital accounts. Reshetnikov turned to China as a source of the expanding availability of rubles. The minister estimates that 41% of the money made from exports right now is in rubles. Some of this is converted back into foreign currency, or deposited into foreign accounts. According to Reshetnikov, this means we have a foreign exchange market overseas. There has been no word on whether or not the minister has a concrete strategy for introducing the Chinese model in Russia. However, adopting it would require abandoning the concept of a freely convertible ruble. The Federal Reserve has historically fought against any moves in this area. A freely convertible ruble has long been considered one of Putin's crowning achievements. The effects on the economy of abandoning the convertible ruble are unknown. Our confidence in the national currency is already low, and this would only make import-export more difficult. There wouldn't be much of an effect on FDI, as FDI has all but dried up since the invasion. On the other hand, it could give rise to an underground economy where monetary transactions are only ostensibly illegal. One of Russia's security agencies was bound to seize control of this market at some point. Attempts by the government to control the country's currency exchange rate and its influx of foreign investment could damage public faith in the central bank and the ruble. Of course, Rezhedekov wouldn't talk about the war, Western sanctions, and skyrocketing public spending that are driving up currency demand. Inquiring minds want to know why the rest of the world should care. Discussions of the ruble's value may one day lead to calls for additional controls on the country's financial system. If this is thought to be possible, companies and individuals may rush to move money wherever they can as soon as possible.